Okay, today I thought we'd take a look at the late 1970s, 78, 79, R2-D2 made by Kenner. And this is the radio controlled one, which you can steer and drive around and has beeping sounds. And back in the 1980s, I would go to swap meets and yard sales and stuff like that. You could find these all over back then. And that's where these ones came from. That's why none of them are mint. But, you know, like the top of the box is missing because it had been from a garage sale or a flea market or something like that. But it has most of the pertinent information and Kenner. I think this one still has the bottom. Yeah, we still got the bottom on this one. And you got more here, info here if you haven't ever looked one over. And it's a styrofoam case. There's actually another robot and remote control in this box. This is a loose one that I had. And what you're going to find if you come up with one of these, unless someone's worked on it, it's not going to be in working condition. There are two micro motors for either leg, because the wheels are driven by independent motors. And then there's a third motor that rotates the head, and the position of the head determines which motor is on and which direction the motor is turning. That's how you steer it. So on the remote control, you have a button that says head. You push down on this one and that rotates the head. And this one says body. That means driving. So you'd push up to do that. And that's how you're going to control the whole thing. There's a 9-volt battery in the transmitter. In the robot itself, you have a 9-volt battery and two C-cell batteries. There's your main on-off switch there. And there is some light text that you should be able to read there. I'm going to say it's super complicated on the inside. What I was getting at earlier is why they're not going to be working. The two micro motors, there's an 8-tooth gear on each one that starts a chain of gears that go down to drive everything. And the 8-tooth gear on that little micro motor will always be split. Now, even though it's split, sometimes they'll still work enough to where it'll run, but it'd be real noisy because every time that split comes around, it'll make a lot of chatter. Eventually, it'll slip on the motor shaft and then it won't drive. But what normally happens is where the split is when it comes around to meet the next gear, that causes a bind. So if it happens to stop there, it's not going to start up again on its own. Then on the motor that controls the head rotation, which ends up controlling the direction the robot goes in, that's a normal size motor like we'd see in any of our other Japanese tin robot toys from that era. And it's also an 8-tooth gear, but it has a larger hole diameter in it. The little micro ones have a very small one. So replacing the gear up on this one is fairly easy in that it's a standard 8-tooth gear. Replacing one of the micro ones is very difficult to find the 8-tooth gear with the small enough hole to fit the motor shaft. And in fact, generally when you find one, it'll be too small. It'll be like a 1mm hole, and then you'll have to drill it out to fit and press it on. Maybe after we play with this, I'll actually tear this apart and let you guys take a look inside, because it's actually quite fascinating. There's a ton of electronics in here. There's a whole separate, very complicated board just for the beeping sounds that the robot makes. On the very earliest versions, which this one is, there's actually a paper driving speaker in there that mounts in place. And then, like within a year later or 2 years later, they went to a little piezo element inside there instead of a paper cone driven speaker mechanism. There's a custom circuit board which is round that fits up on the top of this whole menagerie, and there's no IC components in here, obviously, based on the vintage 1978. It's all discrete components, all transistors and diodes and capacitors, and they're all full-size stuff. There's no surface mount back then. So this custom round circuit board is loaded with components facing down in on the back side of that component board, about over in this location over in here, there's a series of 4 leaf switches. and the 4 leaf switches control the motors. Like I say, whether they're on, whether they're off, whether they're driving forward, whether they're driving backward. All of that's by the leaf switches in the top of the head, built into this plastic head. As it rotates, there are little fingers that, right now, for example, this head being aiming almost forward is going to be hitting the appropriate switches to drive both motors in the forward position. If you turn it to the side, then it's going to reverse the direction of one of the motors or the other, depending on which way you're turning. And if it's facing back, then both motors are driven backward. There's also a set of wipers that come up and hit 2 contacts in this plastic dome to illuminate, early for its time, I believe, an LED. I don't think it's a light bulb, pretty sure it's an LED, an early one. In any case, a light source behind here which blinks, and there's the 2 contacts that go up to that. It's a very sophisticated toy, and it was actually quite expensive back then when it was made. So let's turn it on, like so. And then we have the transmitter, and let's see if I can keep it in the picture but not in the way of anything. So I'll push what should be the head rotation. So you have, the head is turning around. I brought it back around more or less to the front. Now I'm going to push up on this, which is the body mode, and it should drive in pretty much whatever direction the head is aiming at. Okay, let's turn the head now to the back, or yeah, let's go back so I don't run off the top of the tabletop here. And let's turn it over to the right. Am I keeping everything where you guys can see what's going on? Let's turn the head this way. And let's turn the head again. So you can see how that works. It actually worked quite well. It's a pretty cool toy in that you drive it and steer it and tell it which way you want things to go. Now, rather than tearing this one apart, let's slip this one out of the box. In case you guys ever have to work on one, let's go through it and then you'll know how to do it. So inside the foam case you have your transmitter. You have to screw the wire. Not going to get that now. It just fell down behind the cabinet in the wall. That's going to take a lot of work to fish that out, so I hope you guys appreciate that. At any rate, that screws into the top of this transmitter, if you haven't lost it. And the robot itself, by the way, these tend to yellow, whether they've been in the sunlight or in fluorescent lights, or whether they've been on the box. It's the type of plastic. It's an actual chemical reaction. And yes, you can ultra bright them, which basically is hydrogen peroxide and some UV light, and make them white again for a little while. So if you've got to get in one, first thing you have to do is you have to take these screws off the sides of the legs here. Maybe if I move the camera this way, I can stand in here a little easier. So you're going to start by taking these out of here. There's not all that many screws involved, but they're all different lengths. The ones you take from either side are going to be the same, but I mean, you would have thought they could have designed the toy to use the same length screws to make assembly easier. So once you've taken those 2 out, you now have 2 down in this lower part of the leg section, which is harder to get at because you have to come at it at an angle, unless you happen to have a screwdriver with a really long shaft. And I do have one in the house, but not out here. So you do this. Man, I wish I'd caught that antenna before it fell down behind the cabinet. Now there's a couple of clips. So you got to kind of clip that out. Clip that out. Then this leg piece just comes off. And now you can see the gear drive chain. This is the end of the micromotor. This is the 8-tooth gear, which will always be split. I'd already gone in here earlier today and replaced both of them on both sides. Let's get the other side off. And here's the other side. You can see it's exactly the same setup. Now to split the halves, to get inside the thing, you have to open the battery box, and this is what the battery box looks inside. And you see that screw back in there in the bottom? I'm going to have to get that out of there. I'm going to get a longer screwdriver to make that easier. And there we got that. Then you should be able to take, there's some clips up in here and in here. So if you start separating the toy down lower, that should unclip itself. Yeah. And there you have it. Now you see on this one, what you're looking at right there in the center screen, that's a piezo sounder. Whereas if you'd had the original speaker one, this round loop right here, that's where the magnet in the original one, like, is in this robot back here. This has the paper speaker one. That's where the paper speaker one mounts in that version. This, let me turn this light on. Let's get a little bit more light on this subject. This whole circuit board here and all those components, including a transformer and everything, that's just for the sounds. That's just the beeping. Up here you can see some of the components, but it's all the way around a circuit board that's up in there. Back here you can see this motor. This is the bottom of it. The gear is up in here. See that little gear right there? That's your other 8-tooth gear. That's the one that does the head turning. That's the one that would be split, and you'd have to replace that. But at least that's the standard 8-tooth size one. So if you have any standard replacement ones, you can just push a new one of those on. Where you're going, how do you get in there to push it on? Well, it's not easy. I don't know if I want to take it any further apart, but basically we have a screw here, and there's one clear back there. If you release that, then this whole black piece in the head, everything can be removed from the body. And once you have that out of the body, right down in here, let's see if we can get the camera angle just right there. You see that screw head? That's on a shaft on the bottom of this head. It goes all the way through. There's a spring there. You can see the spring. So once you take that screw out, that black piece of plastic and that spring would all lift out of the way. Then there's a little cap with a clutch on it. That lifts out of the way. There's a big flat gear, which is what's being driven by that motor we just talked about up there. You can then just lift this whole top of the head off. When you lift the top of the head off, the only thing you're going to see on the top are those 4 little leaf switches, and you'll see embossed into this plastic, or the plastic fingers that push on those switches as the head rotates. So that's how you got to get into one of these if you ever need to repair one. It's not that hard to get in there as long as you've got the parts that you need to fix it up. And there, for better or for worse, there, let's get a gutty picture. Everyone loves a good gutty picture. So there you have it. It's your Kenner's R2-D2 from 1978, 1979, thereabouts, radio-controlled robot.